My son said I'm an embarrassment, so I turned his dream into a legacy he couldn't ignore. I never thought I'd live long enough to hear these words from my only son. My colleagues said you're embarrassing, Mom. Please, don't come around anymore. The door shut in my face before I could even catch my breath. A slam that echoed louder than the night my husband walked out decades ago. I stood there on his polished porch in Austin, clutching my old suitcase with one hand and a folder of resumes no one wanted in the other. The porch light cast him in gold, suit crisp, hair slick, like a man who belonged to another world. And me, I was just the unwanted shadow on his perfect doorstep. I had lost my job at the library the week before, 30 years gone in one board meeting, and in my desperation I thought maybe, just maybe, Michael would remember I was still his mother, that I was the woman who worked double shifts, skipped meals, and stitched clothes by candlelight just so he could grow into that very suit he was wearing. But in that moment, none of it mattered. To him, I was nothing more than a stain on his curated life. The night swallowed me whole. I walked until the streetlights turned into stars and ended up at a roadside motel, the kind that smelled like bleach and old smoke. The walls were thin, the mirror too cracked to reflect me properly. Maybe that was mercy. Lying on the stiff mattress, I tried to sleep, but the words wouldn't stop replaying in my head. Embarrassment, don't come around anymore. I thought of all the nights I stayed awake so he could dream. And now here I was, wide awake again, only this time with nowhere left to go. The motel bed creaked every time I moved, like it was warning me not to get comfortable. The air conditioner rattled, coughing out more dust than cold air. I stared at the ceiling, wide awake, wondering how I had gone from holding bedtime storybooks to holding a room key with peeling paint. I wasn't someone who cried easily. Not when I buried my sister alone. Not when I watched the library doors lock for the last time. But that night, the tears came anyway. Silent, hot, unrelenting. Because it hit me, after everything I'd sacrificed, I had become an inconvenience to the very person I'd lived my entire life for. Michael never knew the real cost of his dreams. He didn't know what it felt like to count pennies at the grocery store, praying the cashier wouldn't notice if I came up short. He didn't know how many times I ate saltine crackers for dinner so he could have fresh notebooks for architecture class. I remembered the nights I left the library at 9, rushed to my second job at the diner, and stumbled home just in time to pack his lunch for the next day. I never remarried, never dated, never once put myself first, because I was so sure that one day, when he stood tall in the world, I'd know it was worth it. But lying there in that dingy motel, listening to the hum of the vending machine outside my door, I realized something I'd never dared to admit. I had built him a ladder, rung by rung, with my bare hands. And now he was climbing so high he couldn't even see me anymore. That night, grief sat heavy on my chest. Not just grief for the son who had turned away, but grief for the woman I used to be, the one who believed love and sacrifice were enough. And in that silence, I wondered if maybe he was right. Maybe I was just an embarrassment. The next morning, I couldn't stand the motel walls pressing in on me. My feet carried me back to the neighborhood where Michael had grown up, as if my body remembered the way home even when my heart didn't. The old brick house we once lived in was still there, though the paint was faded and the fence leaned tiredly to one side. The swing Michael used to beg me to push was long gone, but the tree still stood, taller than before, as if it had survived storms I never could. And then I heard a voice I hadn't heard in years. "Linda Cooper, is that really you?" I turned, and there she was, Clara, sitting on her porch with a paintbrush in one hand and a coffee mug in the other. She hadn't changed much. Same sharp eyes, same laugh that carried like church bells down the block. She dropped her brush, marched right over, and hugged me so tight I almost forgot how broken I felt. "You look like you've been through hell, sugar," she said, pulling back to study my face. But I'll tell you something, hell ain't strong enough to keep you down. I tried to smile, but it came out weak. I lost my job. Michael doesn't want me around. I don't even know who I am anymore. Clara squinted, the way she used to when she caught kids lying about homework. That's nonsense. You're the same woman who raised a boy on your own, who sewed my curtains for $5 when I couldn't afford new ones, who kept this whole block alive with her library books and lemonade stands. You forgot yourself, Linda, but I didn't. I sank into her porch chair, letting her words settle. For a moment, the years rolled back, two young mothers sitting side by side, dreaming of better days while our kids played tag in the yard. Back then, the future felt wide open. Clara leaned closer, her voice low but firm. You still got fight in you, girl. You just forgot how to throw a punch. Something in me flickered then. Small, fragile, but alive. For the first time since Michael shut the door in my face, I felt the heat of anger, not the kind that destroys, but the kind that rebuilds. I left Clara's porch with nothing in my pockets but her words. But they felt heavier than gold, because maybe I wasn't finished yet. That night, back at the motel, I pulled out the one thing I had guarded for decades. A worn leather notebook, edges frayed, pages filled with numbers only I understood. It wasn't much, just a record of every dime I'd scraped together, sewing money tucked away, small dividends from the teacher's credit union, a few savings bonds my sister left behind, even loose change I'd rolled into paper tubes on sleepless nights. I added it all up under the flickering motel lamp. The total wasn't impressive, not by Michael's standards. But to me, it was a quiet fortune, proof that even when the world tried to take everything, I'd always saved a piece of myself. I asked myself, what do you do when your own child says you don't belong? The answer came sharper than I expected. You build something they can't ignore. 2 days later, I walked the cracked sidewalks near the old rail yard. That's when I saw it. A warehouse, boarded windows, rust creeping down its sides, but with bones strong enough to stand another 100 years. My breath caught, because I remembered this place. Michael used to sketch it when he was a boy, imagining how he'd transform it into a community center filled with light, art, and stories. He once told me, "One day, Mom, I'll turn that broken place into something beautiful." But somewhere along the way, he traded that dream for glass towers and designer suits. And here it was, still waiting. I pressed my hand against the cold brick, and for the first time in weeks, I smiled. Not a bitter smile, a knowing one. This was it, the beginning of something he thought he'd forgotten. But I had kept alive all along. 2 months later, the warehouse didn't look like ruin anymore. Fresh paint covered the rust, soft lights glowed behind the windows, and inside, rows of bookshelves leaned against exposed brick walls like they'd been waiting their whole lives to be read again. Local kids had painted murals on one side, sunflowers and skylines, and volunteers strung Edison bulbs across the ceiling so the whole place glimmered at night. I called it Harbor of Stories. The first evening I walked through the wide double doors, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel unwanted. I felt like the woman who used to carry a boy on her hip and tell him that the world could be anything he dared to imagine. And now I was daring for both of us. When the final touches were done, a handmade wooden sign nailed above the entrance, the floor swept clean of decades of dust. I stood back, pulled out my phone, and took one single photograph. The warehouse reborn. The dream my son had abandoned, breathing again. I didn't add a caption, no explanation. I just sent the photo to Michael. 5 minutes later, my phone rang. His name lit up the screen. For a moment, I considered letting it go to voicemail. Let him sit with the silence the way I had, but I answered. "Mom," his voice cracked, sharp, unsure. Why are you sending me this picture? That warehouse, did you really?" "Yes," I said, steady as stone. "I bought it, I built it, and it's alive again." On the other end, only silence. Then, barely above a whisper, "That was my dream." I smiled, though he couldn't see it. Exactly. And for the first time in years, it was me who hung up first. 2 nights after I sent that photo, headlights swept across the cracked parking lot outside Harbor of Stories. I was sitting in the corner with a mug of coffee, the smell of fresh paint still clinging to the air, when I heard the heavy slam of a car door. His footsteps echoed on the concrete before he even appeared in the doorway. Michael, my son. His tie was loosened, his eyes bloodshot, his hair a mess like he'd been wrestling with himself the whole drive. He stopped in the middle of the room, turning in slow circles, taking it all in. The books, the murals, the light, and then his gaze landed on me. "You really did this," he whispered. "Yes," I said. My voice was calm, too calm. He walked toward me, but his steps faltered. His face looked younger somehow, like the boy who used to dream in pencil sketches. This was mine," he said, his voice breaking. "The design, the idea, I had it when I was 18. I kept those drawings hidden under my bed. I thought I'd come back to it one day." I reached into my bag and pulled out a worn folder, edges curled with time. Slowly, I handed it to him. His hands shook as he opened it. Inside were his old sketches, every line, every note, every dream. "I kept them," I said softly, "even when you didn't." Tears blurred his vision as he stared at the pages. He sank into a chair, the folder clutched against his chest like it might disappear. And then the confession tumbled out. "Mom, I didn't just walk away from this dream. I walked away from Dad, too." His words were jagged, cutting the air. "He tried to come back once, twice. He called, he wrote, but I told him we didn't need him. I thought I was protecting you. I was 16, angry, stupid. I didn't tell you because I was scared you'd hate me." The room spun. My breath caught. All these years, I thought I'd been abandoned completely. But the truth was harsher. My son had built a wall to keep his father out, and in doing so, he had buried a piece of me, too. Michael's shoulders shook as he bent forward, sobbing like a boy again. "I'm sorry. God, Mom, I'm so sorry. I didn't know it would make me into this hollow person. I didn't know it would make me turn on you, too." I stood there, heart pounding, torn between fury and grief. Finally, I placed a hand on his trembling shoulder. "There's more than one way to lose a family, Michael," I whispered. "Sometimes it's not fire or absence. Sometimes it's silence, and you've been silent far too long." For the first time in years, he didn't argue, he just wept. Michael lifted his face from his hands, streaked with tears, eyes red and desperate. "I thought I was protecting you," he choked. "I thought if I kept him away, you'd finally stop hurting." My chest burned, fury mixing with grief. "Protecting me?" I spat. "By stealing my choice, by erasing the one person who should have fought for us. You weren't protecting me, Michael. You were controlling the story because you were too angry to face it." He flinched, but I couldn't stop. The words came like floodwater, unstoppable after years of silence. "I worked myself raw so you could have a life beyond these walls. And what did you do with it? You climbed so high you forgot the ground you came from. You called me an embarrassment while standing on the back of every sacrifice I made." His voice rose, sharp, ragged. "And you think I don't know that? You think I don't carry it every day? That every success I've had doesn't feel like a debt I can't pay? That every time I see you, I don't hear the word unworthy echoing in my head?" The warehouse trembled with our voices. Years of unspoken pain cracked open between us. I stepped closer, forcing him to meet my eyes. "You turned your shame into armor, Michael, but you didn't realize you were cutting me with every edge of it." He shook his head violently, tears spilling again. "I didn't mean to hurt you. I couldn't forgive him. And when I saw you, I saw all of it. His leaving, your struggle, the weight I never asked for. I blamed you for the life I didn't want to remember." The words landed heavy, sharp enough to split me in two. For a moment, I nearly collapsed, but instead I straightened my back. "No more," I said, voice steady as stone. "You don't get to bury me under your guilt. You don't get to erase my life because it's easier for you to pretend I don't exist. I am your mother, Michael, not your shame, not your secret, your mother." His face crumpled. He reached for me, but I stepped back. The distance cut deeper than a blade. That was the break. The moment the wall we had both built, his out of pride, mine out of silence, finally cracked. And nothing would ever be the same again. The night after our fight, the warehouse was silent. Not the heavy kind of silence that suffocates, but the kind that waits, like the world holding its breath to see what comes next. Michael didn't leave. He slept in one of the half-finished rooms on a cot meant for volunteers. In the morning, I found him sitting at a workbench, head bent over a hammer and a stack of nails. His suit jacket was gone, sleeves rolled up, tie tossed aside. For the first time in years, he didn't look like a polished stranger. He looked like my boy again. "I don't know how to fix all this," he said quietly. "But maybe I can start here." He drove the first nail into a wooden frame, clumsy but determined. We worked side by side that day, painting, hauling, scrubbing decades of dust out of corners. Local kids peeked in through the door, curious. Clara stopped by with sandwiches and her trademark sass, telling Michael he was finally doing something useful with those architect hands. For the first time in years, we laughed, real laughter, raw and unguarded. Weeks turned into months. The harbor of stories became more than just a building. It became a refuge. Children sprawled across the floor with picture books. Retired teachers ran workshops. Veterans gathered at long tables, telling stories they'd never spoken out loud. And always, there was coffee brewing and light spilling from the windows into the night. Michael designed new spaces, reading nooks, art rooms, a small stage for performances. But every blueprint, every plan, he brought to me first. "Does this feel right, Mom?" he'd ask. The question alone was healing. One evening, we held our first community night. Folding chairs lined the floor, voices rose in song, and people shared stories until the stars came out. As I watched Michael stand before the crowd, hands trembling, he cleared his throat and said, "My mother built me a life when she had nothing. I called her an embarrassment. But today, she gave me back my dream. This place exists because of her. And I'm asking for something better than forgiveness. I'm asking for a second chance." The room was still. Then came applause, loud, unrelenting like rain on a tin roof. I sat in the back, tears slipping down my cheeks, not because I had won, but because I no longer needed to. Justice hadn't come in the form of revenge. It had come in the form of rebuilding, one nail, one book, one forgiven silence at a time. That night, as I locked the doors and the lights glowed behind me, Michael slipped his arm around my shoulders. "Home isn't where you hide," he said softly. "It's where you finally let people in." I leaned against him, tired but lighter than I'd been in decades. And for the first time in years, I believed him.